In the following minutes, you'll find out which dictator's wife lived only to the age of Christ, which woman ended up in seclusion and sweet oblivion, and for which woman a voluntary departure from this world was a liberation from the tyrant's oppression. All this in the final part of Dictators' Wives. Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. Older generations probably know the hit by Madonna from the mid-90s. It was featured in the film musical Evita. This famous musical tells the story of Eva Perón, the second wife of Argentine president and dictator Juan Perón. Maria Eva Duarte Ibarguren was born on the 7th May 1919 in the town of Los Toldos in the Buenos Aires province of Argentina. Her parents were divorced and her mother worked as a cook to support herself and her children. From an early age, Eva had to help with household chores and take care of her sisters and brother. At the age of 15, she moved to Buenos Aires to fulfill her dream of becoming an actress. She was only partially successful in this. Despite landing many roles, she still lived in poverty, and so she also worked as a model to make ends meet. Over time, she transitioned to radio, where she became very popular and finally began to succeed financially as well. In 1944, Eva met Juan Perón at a charity event. At the time, he was the Minister of Labor. Perón was 24 years older than Eva, but they fell in love with each other and got married a year later. That same year, Juan Perón was imprisoned by his political opponents, who were trying to overthrow his government. However, Eva did not give up and used her popularity to organize mass demonstrations demanding Perón's release. The demonstrations culminated on the 17th October 1945, when more than 200,000 people gathered at Plaza de Mayo. Perón was soon released and, thanks to public support, was elected president a year later. Eva helped him a lot during the campaign, which had been unthinkable until then. At that time, women in Argentina didn't even have the right to vote. After Juan was elected president, Eva immediately began working to improve the lives of the poor and the oppressed. She secured women's right to vote, created a healthcare system for children and the poor, and at her initiative, a train equipped with medical supplies traveled across the country so that even people in the most remote corners of Argentina could receive treatment. She built new schools and healthcare facilities, organized holiday camps and social events for young people. She built social housing, organized the distribution of food, school supplies and clothing in the slums of Argentine cities as well as in rural areas. Eva became Evita, or Little Eva, and her popularity reached extraordinary heights. That is why the public urged her to run for vice president in the upcoming elections. She refused. At that time, her cancer had already fully developed. Nevertheless, she continued to support her husband, and in the elections of 1952, Juan managed to defend his presidential post. She made her last public appearance at Juan's inauguration in June 1952, and 2 months later, at the age of just 33, she passed away. Her death was an enormous tragedy for the Argentine people. Up to 2 million people attended the funeral procession. Lucía Hiriart, also known as the Iron Lady, was the First Lady of Chile from 1973 to 1990, when her husband, General Augusto Pinochet, ruled the country as a dictator. Lucía was born in the Chilean city of Antofagasta into a wealthy family on the 1st of December 1923. Her father, Osvaldo Hiriart Corvalán, was a lawyer, a former senator of the Radical Party, and a former minister of the Interior. Her mother, Lucia Rodríguez Audade Hiriart, came from French Basque country. Lucía studied at the Santiago Lyceum. In 1943, she married Augusto Pinochet, who at that time was a lieutenant at the infantry school of the Chilean army. Together, they had a total of 5 children, 3 daughters and 2 sons. During Pinochet's rule, Lucía was known for her support of his regime. Paradoxically, she founded several charitable organizations that were meant to help the victims of Pinochet's regime, but at the same time were suspected of serving as tools of propaganda. Pinochet's rule was a controversial period in the history of this narrow country. In a situation where the country was plagued by food shortages, the economy was collapsing, violence was on the rise, and terrorist attacks were increasing, the army, under Augusto's leadership, carried out a military coup and takeover in 1973. President Salvador Allende was overthrown. Pinochet was admired for the subsequent economic reforms, which led to Chile's economic growth, and people even began to speak, perhaps unjustly, of the Chilean economic miracle. However, he was also criticized for human rights violations, which reached very high levels during his rule. According to estimates, up to 40,000 people were murdered or disappeared during Pinochet's rule. Many others were tortured or imprisoned. Political opposition was banned in the country, the constitution was abolished, and Pinochet concentrated all power solely in his own hands. He ruled by decree and was not only the president but also the commander-in-chief of the army and the so-called supreme head of the nation. Lucía was closely associated with Pinochet's regime and was one of his staunchest supporters. In 1978, she was appointed chairwoman of the Chilean Women's Association, which was considered a propaganda tool of Pinochet's regime. She was known for her conservative views. For example, she had absolutely no understanding for homosexuality or abortion. Augusto ruled until 1990, when he handed over power in democratic elections, but the Pinochets retained a certain degree of influence even afterwards. Augusto died in 2006 and Lucía followed him in December 2021 at the age of 98. Her death marked the end of nearly 50 years of the Pinochet era. Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge came to power in 1975 after a bloody civil war, and although their brutal regime lasted less than 4 years, they managed to exterminate up to a quarter of Cambodia's entire population at the time. All cities were evacuated and their inhabitants were relocated to the countryside, where they were kept working in the fields or in the jungle. Private property was banned, and people who from then on had to wear only black uniform clothing were allowed to own only a spoon and a bowl for eating. A new calendar was introduced, starting with year 0. All factories, banks, hospitals, government offices and most schools were abolished. Money was also abolished and trade was forbidden. Fishing and gathering fruit that had fallen from trees were considered counter-revolutionary acts, and you could be executed for them. People could be executed simply for wearing glasses. For women, having smooth skin or manicured nails was suspicious. The methods of execution were extremely brutal. Besides shooting, beheading or throat-slitting with a machete, and being beaten to death with a stick, hoe or pickaxe were commonplace. Being trampled by an elephant, or more modern methods like being run over by a truck or agricultural machinery. Partners were assigned to people and their children were then taken away and raised by the ruling party. Pretty bizarre. All this suffering ended at the turn of 1978 and 1979 when troops from neighboring Vietnam invaded Cambodia, occupied the entire country in about 2 weeks and overthrew the ruling Khmer Rouge. They were forced to retreat to the Thai-Cambodian border, from where they waged a long guerrilla war, but they never had any influence over the country's government again. Khieu Ponnary was born on the 3rd of February 1920 into the privileged family of a Cambodian judge. She studied at Sisovat Lycée, where she became the first Cambodian woman to earn a bachelor's degree. It was also there that she met her future husband, Salot Sa, later known as Pol Pot. She worked as a teacher, and during the 1960s, she began to be politically active in her husband's party. She was entrusted with propaganda and educational work, became the party secretary for Kampong Tom province, and after the takeover of power, she became the chairwoman of the Women's Union of Democratic Kampuchea, as Cambodia was then renamed. However, even at that time, she began to show signs of mental disorders caused by chronic schizophrenia. She became severely paranoid and was convinced that the Vietnamese were trying to kill her and her husband. Her condition had become so serious that she was quietly sidelined, and she probably didn't even know that Pol Pot had divorced her and later married another woman. Pol Pot died under house arrest on April 15, 1998. Khieu then died on July 1, 2003, by which time she no longer remembered or recognized her siblings and loved ones. The first wife of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin was Katerina Svanidze, born on the 2nd April 1885 in Georgian Tbilisi into a family of impoverished nobles. She worked as a laundress and seamstress, and through her brother Alyosha she met Peppa. They got married in 1906, but instead of a newlywed idyll, Stalin was preparing for revolution, robbing banks, organizing sabotage, and constantly ending up behind bars. A year later, Katka developed tuberculosis, and after also contracting typhus, she died at the age of 22. Stalin was devastated by her death and even considered suicide. That was probably the last sign of remorse we ever saw from Stalin. They had a son together, Yakov, whom, after Katka's death, Stalin, entrusted as a small baby to the care of relatives and for a long 14 years, showed no interest in him at all. Stalin was infuriated by the news that his son had become engaged to a Jewish girl. Out of this unhappy love, Yakov attempted suicide by shooting himself, but missed, and Stalin then dismissively remarked about him that he couldn't even shoot properly. During World War II, he served as an artillery officer in the Red Army. However, in the Battle of Smolensk, he was captured, and when the Nazis later discovered that he was Stalin's son, they allegedly wanted to exchange him for the captured Marshal Paulus. But Stalin refused, saying that he would not exchange a marshal for a mere lieutenant. Yakov was sent to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, where, according to official reports, he committed suicide in April 1943 by running into the electric fence. The Stalinist purges of the 1930s. Even the family of Yekaterina, so adored by Stalin, was not spared. In the end, not only her sister Mariko, but also her brother Alyosha and his wife Maria faced the firing squad. Stalin's second wife was Nadezhda Alliluyeva. She was born on the 22nd September 1901 and met Stalin through her father, with whom Stalin was hiding just before the 1917 revolution. She was only 15 years old then. After the Bolshevik coup, she began working for him as his personal secretary and typist. They had 2 children together, a son named Vasily and a daughter named Svetlana, and at the same time Stalin's previously mentioned son, Yakov, also began living with them. Paradoxically, she developed a stronger bond with him than with her own children. But living with Stalin was not easy at all. He cheated wherever he could and even brought his mistresses home. They argued constantly. She reproached him for his inhumane political methods and blamed him for the famine in Ukraine. In return, he called her stupid, insulted her, humiliated her, and mocked her publicly. At a party held to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution, Stalin, already quite drunk, openly flirted with General Yegorov's wife, which of course Nadezhda did not like at all. She scolded Stalin, but he just laughed at her, threw orange peels at her, and tapped his cigarette ash on her. When a toast was made to the destruction of the enemies of the state, Nadezhda refused to raise her glass, which in turn infuriated Stalin. They shouted at each other for a while, after which Nadezhda decided to leave and went to bed. In the morning, she was found dead with a gunshot wound to the heart. Suicide did not suit the communists, so an official statement was issued saying she had died of peritonitis. Over time, there were speculations that Stalin had her shot, but that is unlikely. In any case, he did not attend her funeral. With this, I would like to conclude the 4th and final part of our journey through the palaces and bedrooms of dictators, and especially their sometimes all too expensive better halves. Well, at least for now, surely in the future, somewhere in a corner of our globe, some dictator will still emerge and will want to have a devoted woman by his side. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please share, like, subscribe and hit the bell. You know how it goes. See you next time, and remember, everything is completely different than it seems.